Preparing. Preparing. Perfect. So we are going to wait. Perfect. We are going to wait for some people.
Cool.
We are going to wait. We are going to wait for some people. Okay. So I'm just gonna send another notification. How are you doing? How are things there with the COVID and so on? They're still in lockdown or so, or
yeah,
or a new one like here?
What's that?
Or a new one like here. We started today in Germany. We started a new one.
It's pretty much the same old lockdown we've had the whole time.
Right. Yeah.
You started a new one over there?
We started a new one today, but to be honest, doesn't seem like a lockdown. I'm living in the city center, and it's like quite normal. So doesn't change too much. We'll see. So let me see some for the people here. One today, but to be honest, doesn't seem like. Okay. All right. Okay, there are a couple of people here. Should we start? Should we start? Yes, like just getting people. So I just send a notification on Instagram, so they know that we are live. Okay, so first of all, thank you a lot for accepting the invite. I was like super eager to listen, and it was funny how I told you how I get to your book actually, because someone in LinkedIn put a like or something, and I said I need this book, and then I get to your profile and so on, and it was like super interesting topic, and then I realized that you already been in a couple of talks, and which is funny is some agency from here from Cologne, where I'm in Germany. They told to me the other day that they were in another talk from yours, another of your talk, and they were like really surprised, and then they really liked it, so they wanted to be online again today. So I hope they can join. All right, so I think we could start with some words about the IDF. Most of the people know it. I don't know how much people will be connected today. I hope all the ones from that are going to be here from the meetup page. But yeah, so first of all, again, thank you. To be honest, I was, like I said, I was eager to listen to this talk and then to start in the book. I didn't start it yet. I have it there ready because of it happens to me, of course, all the time regarding biases. Is not just in design, for real life and so on. I think this is going to serve in a lot of senses. So yeah, thank you, David, again, and I'll give it to you. You can start. I mean, I think you can. I mean, in the meantime, we can, while we wait from other people, we can. I mean, you can start telling us a bit more about you. Will be really nice to hear that before the talk, and yeah. So thanks.
Sure, and thanks for having me. You'll hear some about this in the talk, but yeah, I've been fascinated by cognitive bias for quite a few years now, and my day job is in UX and content strategy, so it was kind of a natural fit for me to start merging the two together into the talk you're going to hear today and the book that I've put out. But yeah, I do content strategy for a company called Think Company out of the US. It's an experience design firm. And I've written this book where I really try to tackle a lot of the different biases that we have as designers and the biases that our users have and how we can sort of like, account for them when we do our work.
Yeah, true. Great. Yeah, I think you can just start. Just go ahead if you want to. Can you share screen?
You might have to enable participant screen share.
Yes. Make you co-host so you can have and that's it. You can.
Okay.
That should be it.
All right, and then you can see my screen.
Yes. I think we need to do a T-shirt, right? If maybe there is other in the market with this. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, that's totally what we do.
It's the typical phrase from not just the COVID, right? But COVID is enhance this. So we really need to use see my screen and other things from.
Well, they should just build that feature in, right? It's like literally a little pop-up that says, yes, they can see your screen.
Exactly, yeah. Just a button that says, can you see my screen, instead of saying it again,
Yeah, totally.
Exactly.
So we can start. Yeah, this is designed for cognitive bias, using mental shortcuts for good instead of evil. We can certainly talk about how to use them for evil, but I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on that already. My name is David Dylan Thomas. Like I said, I'm a content strategy advocate at Think Company, an experienced design firm in Philadelphia. And I wrote a book called Design for Cognitive Bias, which is out now from the book Apart. And the road to this book started with a podcast I do called the Cognitive Bias Podcast. The road to the podcast started with this woman. Her name is Iris Bonnet. And she did an amazing talk a few years ago called Gender Equality by Design. And what really struck me is the idea she put forward that a lot of implicit gender and racial bias comes back to pattern recognition. So an example might be, let's say you're hiring a web developer, and the image that comes into your head when I say the words web developer might be skinny white guy. And it's not because you actually think that men are better at programming than women, far from it, but because of the pattern that's been built up over your life in movies, television, offices you might have worked in. That's the image that pops into your head. And so if you see a name at the top of a resume that doesn't quite fit that, you start to give that resume the side eye. Now, when I saw something as horrible as gender bias and racial bias come back to something as simple and, dare I say, human as pattern recognition, I decided I need to learn everything I possibly can about cognitive bias. And so I did. This is a list of cognitive biases from the Rational Wiki. There's well over 100 here. I took one look at that and realized I am not going to figure this out in a day. So I took one a day. And I became the guy who wouldn't shut up about cognitive bias. And so my friends were like, Dave, please just get a podcast. So that's what I did. It's worth establishing from the jump, what is cognitive bias? So at the end of the day, it's a series of shortcuts your mind is making just to get through the day. You have to make something like 1 trillion decisions every single day. Even right now, I'm making decisions about how fast to talk or where to look or what to do with my hands. If I had to think carefully about every single one of those decisions, I'd never get anything done. So it's actually a good thing that our lives are mostly on autopilot, but sometimes the autopilot gets it wrong, and we call those errors cognitive biases. So here's a fun one. It's called illusion of control. And it happens when you're playing a game where you have to roll a die. And if you need a high number, you'll roll the die really hard. And if you need a low number, you'll roll it really gently. And we all know it doesn't make any difference how hard you roll the die, but when we are in situations where we don't have control, we like to think that we have control, and we embody that desire by how we roll the die. Now, this one is not so harmless. It's called confirmation bias, and we see a lot of it today. And it's where you get an idea in your head, and you really only look for evidence that supports that idea. And anytime you see evidence that doesn't support the idea, you say fake news and you move on. So we saw this at the dawn of the Iraq War, where the whole idea was we need to go into Iraq because Saddam has weapons of mass destruction and we need to stop him and blah, blah, blah. Turns out not so much with weapons of mass destruction. And within a year, the president of the United States, who had said ad nauseum, yeah, there are weapons there, said, nope, we didn't find anything. But people still believed that there were weapons of mass destruction there. In fact, so much so that even 14 years later, over 50% of Republicans and 30% of Democrats believed there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So this is a very powerful bias, and we are going to come back to it. Now, the biases are very hard to fight. A, you may not even realize you have it. There's literally a bias called the bias blind spot, where you think you don't have any biases, but you're sure everybody else does. Part of the reason it's hard to spot is that about 95% of cognition happens below the threshold of conscious thought. So you are making these decisions so quickly, you don't even realize you've made them. So the next time somebody asks you why you did something, the most honest answer you can give is, how the hell should I know? Even if you know, you probably still do the bias anyway. So there's a bias called anchoring, where I could ask everybody on this call to write down the last two numbers of their phone number and then say, okay, we're going to bid on a bottle of wine. And those of you who wrote down lower numbers are going to bid lower. Those of you who wrote down higher numbers are going to bid higher. It's called anchoring. It's a thing. Here's the thing. I could tell you about anchoring before we even did the experiment, and you would still do it. In fact, I could say, I will give you cash money not to do it, and you'll probably still do it. Now, the reason we need to care about bias as designers is because of a thing called choice architecture, right? And it's illustrated if you go to a store and you try to buy produce. Generally, the common wisdom is you don't reach for the top of the barrel, because that's where the grocer is going to put the product they're most trying to move, right? The oldest product. They have architected that experience to benefit them. They could have architected it to architect the customer, right? By putting the freshest fruit where it's easiest to reach. The point is, however that is architected will influence the decisions of the person who experiences it. So think about the decisions your user needs to make. As designers, our job is to help people make decisions. And the better we understand how people make decisions, the better we'll be at our jobs. And there are, in fact, content and design choices that can help keep some of these biases in check, or maybe even use them for good. So let's get back to that skinny white dude. As it turns out, an experiment after experiment, if you have two identical resumes and the only difference is the name at the top of the resume, if it's a male name, it tends to go up the chain. If it is a female name, it tends to stay on the pile. Here's the thing. Why do you need that information? What about the name is actually helping you decide who to hire? Think of it like a signal to noise problem. The signal, the thing that's actually helping you make the decision, are the qualifications and the experience, right? The thing that's making it harder potentially to make the decision are things like gender or race or whatever you're reading into the name in terms of gender and race. So the city of Philadelphia actually did try out a round of anonymized hiring. And what they discovered was, one, the best way to anonymize a resume is to physically print it out, get a marker, and redact it like a CIA document. Then what they discovered was, if they found a resume they liked, they would want to go to GitHub, code repository, to see that developer's profile and portfolio. But the second the profile loaded, all of the personal information would be there, and it would ruin the experiment. So what they did was they created a Chrome plugin that would anonymize all that information as the page loaded. And then they took that code and they put it back on GitHub. It's there now if you ever want to try it yourself. Now, this isn't just about helping humans make hiring decisions, right? So Amazon had a hiring bot that was supposed to sift through resumes and help you decide who to hire. And it was extremely sexist. It was so sexist, in fact, that if it saw the name of a woman's college on a resume, it would downgrade the resume. So when they tried to figure out how it got so sexist, they asked, well, how was it trained? And it was trained on the past 10 years of resumes. Guess what most of those resumes had in common? Mostly from guys. So the AI took one look at that and said, gee, you sure must like dudes, and then just kept recommending dudes. We have this myth that AI is somehow like Spock, this like rational, cool-headed, logical being that can look at the world and make these objective decisions, when all it really is a glorified prediction machine, right? If you point it at a racist, sexist world, it will make racist, sexist predictions. Like, I so far as think we should start lying to AI just to get a more objective world out of it. Now, this can go the other way. Amazon Go is a store where you walk in, you take what you want, and you leave, and Amazon Go or Amazon auto-magically just deducts it from your account, which means there's no grocers. Now, Ashley Clark Thompson wrote an article for CNET about her experience in one of these stores called "In Amazon Go, No One Thinks I'm Stealing." She's referring to a phenomenon known as shopping while black. You see it a lot in the States. And it's where you're a black person in a store and you get this hyper-aggressive customer service. Can I help you? Can I help you? No, really, can I help you? In Amazon Go, she didn't experience that because they had removed one key design element from their service design, namely the grocers. So there was no one there to give her this biased experience. So she had a less biased experience because of that design choice. And we're also seeing a version of this in the judicial system, where in San Francisco, they tried out anonymized, basically blind charging. The idea here is that the district attorney, in America, the district attorney has huge leeway in deciding whether or not to bring charges when a crime has been committed. Maybe not surprisingly, they do it more often when it's a Black offender than when it's a white offender, even if the crime is the same. So just like the resumes, they decided, well, why do you need that information? So they started removing the gender and the race of the offender, the gender and the race of the victim, the location of the crime, all of that potentially biasing information, they removed from the crime report so the DA can make the decision purely based on the facts of the case. Another factor we really need to think about as designers is called cognitive fluency. And it's where basically if something looks like it's going to be easy to read, we'll assume whatever it's talking about is going to be easy to do. By the same token, if something looks like it's going to be hard to read, we'll assume whatever it's talking about, it's probably hard to do. So I love making pancakes. I've been making a lot lately. And this is a recipe for pancakes. And it's kind of small print, kind of clumped together. And I glance at that and I think, I don't know, I bet pancakes are pretty hard to make. I don't know if I want to make pancakes. Now I look at this recipe that is nice, big, full width imagery and like little small bursts of text. And I think, I bet pancakes aren't that hard. Maybe I'll make pancakes. A 2-minute video, forget about it. We're making pancakes. Now think about how those choices might come out if I'm trying to choose, do I drive into work or do I take public transportation, right? If I look at that printed schedule, I decide, oh my God, public transportation is impossible. There's no way I'm gonna drive. I take a look at that app screen and before I've read a word, I think to myself, you know what? I bet public transportation isn't that hard. Maybe I'll try it. Now I can't see you, so I'm just gonna, trust you to vote in your hearts. How many of you believe that Rosa Parks was born in 1912? All right, and how many of you believe that Rosa Parks was born in 1914? Okay, you're both wrong. She was born in 1913, but the reason most people choose 1914 is because if something is easier to read, we actually think it's more true, but it gets worse. If something rhymes, we actually think it's more true, and this has consequences. Now, what's happening is that we like things that are easy to process because things that are easy to process feel more certain, and we love certainty. One thing I've discovered by looking at bias after bias is they're all shortcuts to certainty. And things that are easier to process feel more certain. I'll give you an example. If I asked you, what did you get for your 5th birthday? You got a toy truck, right? You might say, I don't know. It's kind of hard to remember. I don't know if that's really true. It doesn't feel very certain. It's hard to process. If I said, on the other hand, what did you have for breakfast this morning? It probably comes to mind pretty quickly. Feels pretty certain, very easy to process. Things that rhyme are easy to remember, easy to process, feel more certain. Things that use really clear fonts and big imagery are really easy to process. They feel more certain. Now, this becomes important when it comes to things that people need to believe. So in America, we have a crisis where African Americans generally do not believe health information that comes from the government. In 2002, in a survey that said the government usually tells the truth about major health issues like HIV/AIDS, only 37% of African Americans agreed with that statement. By 2016, it had dropped to 18%. Now, we could do a whole other talk about why there are legit reasons that African Americans have concerns about health information coming from the government. But the fact remains this is information that could save lives. So if it needs to rhyme, if it needs to use plain language and pictograms, so be it. Now, when I first put this information in the book, my editor very wisely challenged me and said, okay, that's an interesting idea, but can you point to actual evidence that this helps? And I'm glad she pushed me on it because it forced me to do the work and really find some interesting stuff. So this is a study where there were women who were smoking while pregnant. And when they were given materials at the 3rd grade reading level, right, easier to process, they were more likely to abstain from smoking during pregnancy and 6 weeks postpartum. Similarly, when you had people who were caregivers helping other people take medication, when they had a plain language pictogram-based intervention, right, you saw decreased medication dosing errors and improved adherence. Now you might say, okay, that's great for plain language and pictograms, but rhyming, really? So here in the States, we had click it or ticket. And this was legislation in a bunch of different states that said if you don't wear your seatbelt, you can get a ticket. Now, the legislation on its own did a lot of good, especially among older drivers. Younger drivers, not quite as much, so they rolled out Click It or Ticket as a marketing campaign. And the results were national belt use among young men and women ages 16 to 24 moved from 65% to 72% and 73% to 80% respectively. Now, just to put that in human terms, every percentage point you go up in somebody buckling their seatbelt, about 270 lives are saved. So that's roughly 4,000 lives saved in part through rhyming. It's silly, but it works. Now, this easy to process thing extends even to name pronunciation, right? There's literally a name pronunciation effect where if your name is easier to pronounce in the culture that you're in, you kind of have a leg up. So this could go to voting preferences, right? Occupational status. Now, name pronunciation is a culturally sensitive thing, right? There's some cultures where Smith is easier to pronounce. There's some cultures where Mbimu is easier to pronounce. But if your name is easy to pronounce in the culture you're in, you got it. In fact, they looked at one study where they looked across different law firms, and the higher up you went the chain in the law firm, the easier the names got to pronounce. This even extends to the stock market, right? So if you have an IPO and you have a stock, right? If the name of the stock is easier to pronounce, it will perform better. In fact, if even the little stock ticker abbreviation is easier to pronounce, the stock will perform better. So we will lay down real money on things that are easy to process. Now, the most dangerous bias in the world, in my opinion, is the framing effect. And it starts out pretty innocently. Let's say you go to a store and you see a sign that says beef, 95% lean. And next to it, you see a sign that says beef, 5% fat. Which one do you think people are going to line up for? It's the same thing, but I've framed one of them to seem more appealing. Now, this is all good and well when we're talking about beef, but what if I say, should we go to war in April or should we go to war in May? See what I did there? We're no longer discussing whether it's a good idea to go to war in the first place. And wars have been started over less. Now, if you are multilingual, you have a secret weapon against the framing effect. If you think about the decision in your non-primary language, you are less likely to fall for the trap. So I speak a little bit of French. So if I think about the beef decision in French, it would go something like this. Beef, that's bœuf, that's really a lot of vowels. 95%, that's 89 maybe, right? And by the time I'm done all that processing, I see right through the scam. And that's the key. If you slow down your thinking, you are less likely to fall for the bias. Now, the framing effect can actually be used for good. You have an experiment where you show a photo like this to an audience and you ask, should this person drive this car? And what you get is basically a policy discussion, right? And some people say, oh, old people are bad at everything, don't let them drive. And other people are like, oh, how dare you, that's ageist, people should do what they want. All you're gonna learn by the end of that conversation is who's on what side. You could show the same photo to another audience and ask, how might this person drive this car? And what you'll get is a design discussion, right? And some people say, what if we change the shape of the steering wheel? And other people might say, what if we move the dashboard? And what you'll learn by the end of that conversation is a few different ways that person might be able to drive that car. All I did was change 2 words. But by changing the frame of the conversation, I changed the entire conversation. In fact, what if I iris out a little more and ask, how might we do a better job of moving people around? Because that's why the guy was in the car in the first place. He was here, but he wanted to be there. And if I frame it this way, things like public transportation are on the table. Now, this extends even to student evaluations of teachers, right? So this is an area where women are generally prejudiced against, and women are generally get lower ratings of their classes than their male counterparts. So the University of Iowa State University, took a look at this and said, okay, we're going to do an experiment where we put a couple paragraphs before that survey that goes out to students. And it'll basically say that, hey, this is an area where women are usually judged more harshly than their male peers. So when you're making your evaluation, please make sure you're using real criteria and not things like appearance. The people who got those 2 paragraphs tended to rate their professors, their female professors, more highly than the ones who didn't. Now, I want to close by talking about our biases, because these are the ones that can really get our users in trouble. Let's talk about notational bias. And you can see this pop up in sheet music. I had to learn how to play music like this when I was growing up. I learned how to play the saxophone. And I thought that all the music in the world could be expressed this way. And this was how you express music, right? What I found out much later in life was, well, no, there's a whole bunch of African music and Asian music for which this approach is entirely inadequate. But if this is the default, then you're erasing all sorts of different cultures. Now, you can see this more commonly in forms that ask for personal information, right? If I'm writing a form like this and in my head there's only 2 genders, well, guess what? I'm going to eradicate any number of identities. While we're on the topic of asking for personal information, you should know about the self-serving bias. The self-serving bias basically works like this. If something goes well, that's my fault. If something goes poorly, that's your fault. You've probably encountered this bias in your life at some point. That plays out for humans and computers as well. If I'm doing something on a computer and something goes right, I blame me. If I'm doing something on the computer and something goes wrong, I blame the computer, unless I've given the computer a lot of personal information. The more personal information I give the computer, the more likely I am to blame myself if something goes wrong and the computer if something goes right. So we need to be very careful how frequently we ask for personal information, because we could be engendering a very unhealthy dynamic between people and their technology. Now, this plays out for structured content as well. Until 1986, the New York Times prohibited the use of Ms. as an honorific for women, right? So the way that would work is at the first mention of a woman's name in an article, you would say her full name. But at every subsequent mention, you would say either Miss last name or Mrs. last name. Now think about the pattern that sets up. And we know how important patterns are. The pattern that sets up, which basically says that the most important thing to know about a woman is whether or not she's married, and then maybe her last name. So we need to be very careful about how we structure our content and what kind of editorial guidelines we create. Because think about it, article after article after article for almost 100 years in spreading and scaling this terrible bias. So we need to be very thoughtful about our structured content. Language doesn't just describe reality, it shapes it, says Mbima Gugomu, right? And this is legally true. So back in the day, we had in the States, Vice President Dick Cheney, who was basically trying to figure out what he could get away with. So he talks to his lawyers, and his lawyers tell him, look, you're the vice president, which means you're in the executive branch of government. But you also cast the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, which means you're also in the legislative branch of government. But wait a minute, you can't be in both the executive branch and the legislative branch. So maybe you're in neither. And if you're in neither, well, maybe you don't have to follow the rules of either. And he didn't. We see the same thing play out these days with software like Facebook, right? When it suits them, Facebook says, we are a publisher. Hey, New York Times, come publish with us. We get you. When someone points out there are rules for publishers, they say, whoa, buddy, I don't know what you heard. We're a platform. Now, there are tools out there to help us understand how to write more inclusively for folks who usually don't get a lot of say in how they're written about. One of these is Radical Copy Editor. Another good one is Textio, which is especially good if you're trying to write an inclusive job description, because not everybody wants to be a rock star or a ninja. Another term that we can think about, and this is especially true, for English, but a lot of languages lack this. It's called evidentiality. So this is something some languages have, but English and a lot of other languages don't. And it's this idea around verb tense. In English, we use our verb tense a pretty limited way. It basically tells you when something happens. So Bob went to the store. Bob is going to the store. Bob will go to the store. Other languages like Turkish actually make their verb tense do a little more heavy lifting, right? So their verb tense tells you how I know that Bob went to the store, right? So there's one verb tense for I saw Bob go to the store. There's another verb tense for somebody told me Bob went to the store. And there's a whole other verb tense for like I read on the internet that Bob went to the store, right? But the point is I can't tell you that Bob went to the store without also telling you how I know Bob went to the store. Now think about how it would change our behavior, about what we were willing to post, what we were willing to say to each other, what politicians were willing to say, right? If they couldn't say it without also explaining how they knew what they were saying, right? It's pretty delicious, right? So English lacks this, but I think we can find creative ways to harness it. So this is an article, right? So remember how I said that if something is easier to read, it's easier to believe. Well, if something's harder to read, it's also harder to believe. So this is an actual article back when the first teaser dropped for the new James Bond film. And the first paragraph is basically confirmable facts, right? This is who's in it. This is what it's about, right? The second paragraph is a rumor about why the first director got fired. Now, the first paragraph is pretty easy to read, pretty easy to believe. The second paragraph, right? It's a little harder to read and it's a little harder to believe, and it should be, it's a rumor, right? And it's funny, I talk to people about the accessibility issues here. To me, I think you pick like a baseline accessible, typography, but then you make the other stuff even more readable, right? So you're still in the realm of accessibility, but you're giving your user a signal to tell them, hey, this is the part you should really put some credibility into, and this is the part that maybe take it with a grain of salt. I told you we'd come back to this. So I used to misrepresent and misunderstand the scientific method. I used to think it went like this. I have an idea about how the world works, right? And I test that idea. And if I like my result, I write down what I did, and a whole bunch of other people try the same thing. And if they get the same result, yay, it's a law, move on. After talking to some actual scientists, I found out it's a little more complicated than that. It's a little more like this. I have an idea about how the world works. I test that idea. If I like the result, I write down what I did. A whole bunch of people try the same thing. If they like the result, great. I get to spend the rest of forever trying to prove myself wrong. I have to ask myself, if I'm wrong, what else might be true? And then I have to go and try and prove that. That is a much more rigorous approach, and it was invented specifically to fight confirmation bias. Now, as designers, it's very easy for us to leave good design on the table because we fall in love with our first idea. Let me show you just how easy. So let's say I'm going to play a game with a computer, and the computer says, okay, I'm going to show you these numbers and that question mark. Put whatever number you want where that question mark is, and I will tell you whether or not that number fits the pattern. Put in as many numbers as you like, and when you're ready, tell me what you think the pattern is. And if you're like me, you first try 8. And the computer says, congratulations, that fits the pattern. Would you like to try another number? And if you're like me, you say, no, I got this. The pattern is even numbers. And the computer says no. And the reason it says no is because I never tried this. The pattern is not even numbers. The pattern is simply every number is higher than the number that came before it, which is a more elegant solution, probably easier to code, probably cheaper for your client. But I never got there because I was so in love with my even numbers idea. Now, there are tools out there to help us avoid that outcome. One is called Red Team, Blue Team. And it's something that actually the military and journalists use, which I think is kind of neat. You can also see LinkedIn uses this as well. But the basic idea is you have a blue team who does the initial research, maybe gets as far as a wireframe. But before they go any further, the red team comes in for one day. And the red team's job is to go to war with the blue team. And they're there to find every hidden assumption, every more elegant solution, every potential cause of harm that the blue team missed because they were so in love with their first idea. And I like this approach because it's fairly economical, right? I don't have to go to my boss and say, hey, from now on, we got to hire 2 teams for every project, and they got to check each other's work every single day. No, I need 1 team for 1 day to make it a little less likely that we're going to put something harmful out into the world. Another tool for this is called speculative design. And it's basically like the show Black Mirror, which if you've never seen it is kind of like a Twilight Zone for tech. You take some near future tech and you tell a story about how it would play out if actual human beings got their hands on it. And it's usually terrible. In fact, I think anybody working on a new technology by law should have to write a Black Mirror episode about it first. This is a real job. Superflex went down to the United Arab Emirates to help them think about the future of energy. And the question on the table was, do we continue down the path of fossil fuels, or do we invest in renewables? And so one of the things that Superflex did was they said, okay, well, let's think about what your air quality will be like, 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, if you stay down the path of fossil fuels. But they didn't just figure it out, they bottled it, and then they made them breathe it. And by the time you get to about 10 years out, it is unbreathable. So by the end of that engagement, the UAE announced they were going to invest over $150 billion in renewables. Another thing you can try is an assumption audit. And it's a great way to get your biases all out on the table before you begin a project. What you do is you get your team in the room before you do your kickoff and you ask these 5 questions. 1, what identities does your team represent? Now, you only self-identify as you feel comfortable, but think about things like race, income, neurodiversity, etc., right? Then you ask, how might those identities influence the design of this thing we're making? Then you ask, who isn't here, right? Anybody here ever been incarcerated, right? Anybody here ever had their immigration status questioned, right? And then you ask, how might that absence of perspective influence this thing that we're working on? And finally, you ask, what might we do to include, honor, and give power to those perspectives in this process, right? And I choose those words carefully. Include, yes, certainly talk to people. Honor, maybe pay them for their time, but then give power. Can I actually give them decision-making power, especially if they're going to be impacted by the thing that we're creating? The last bias I want to discuss is called the déformation professionnelle. Told you I spoke French. It is a bias where you see the entire world through the lens of your job, which in the workaholic society that a lot of us inhabit might seem like a good idea, right up until it isn't. The paparazzi who ran Princess Di off the road that night probably thought they were doing a good job. And technically speaking, they were. They were getting very difficult to get photographs that were going to fetch them a very high price. What they weren't doing such a great job at was being human beings. Now, when the former police commissioner of Philadelphia took the job, he asked his officers, what do you think your job is? And a lot of them answered, our job is to enforce the law. And he said, okay, that might seem like a reasonable answer, but what if I told you your job is to protect civil rights? Now, that encompasses enforcing the law, but it's a much bigger job because it forces you to treat people with dignity. Now, this slide has been in this talk since 2017. Here in the States and around the world, honestly, this has become a much more visible problem. And I get way more emotional than I used to when I get to this slide, especially even this week in Philadelphia, where I am, and just outside of Portland, we've had 2 more brothers slain. But I leave this slide in here because now more than ever, it is clear that how we define our jobs is a matter of life and death. What Chief Officer Ramsey was telling his other officers that day was that their jobs were harder than they think. And I'm here to tell us our jobs are harder than we think. It's not just design cool stuff. We need to find a way to define our jobs that allows us to be more human to each other. Mike, a bunch of folks already work on this. So you have Mike Montero out at Mule Design. He's put together a red book of design ethics, right? First, do no harm for designers, a kind of Hippocratic oath, and starts out with gems like a designer is first and foremost a human being, right? The Design Justice Network is doing amazing work in this area, and they have 10 core principles. I'm just going to read you the first 2. We use design to sustain, heal, and empower our communities, as well as to seek liberation from exploitative and oppressive systems. 2, we center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of the design process. Now, if you just try to stick to those first 2 principles, you've got your work cut out for you. It's the difference between what Erica Hall calls user-centered design and shareholder-centered design. We often think we're doing the former when in fact we're doing the latter. The Marcula Center for Applied Ethics has wonderful resources for this because the fact remains, these issues are nothing new. We've been talking about the study of ethics for literally thousands of years, and we could take advantage of that wisdom. And they give you great questions to ask based on the study of ethics. So which option will produce the most good and do the least harm? That's the utilitarian approach. Which option leads me to act as the sort of person I want to be? That's the virtue approach, right? All of these questions are here. We just have to use them. Another good intervention is called the Tarot Cards of Tech. And it presents you with these cards that as you click on them, they flip and they give you these really provocative questions about the product you're working on, right? How might cultural habits change how your product is used? Or how might your product change cultural habits? If Twitter asked itself this before it launched, we might see a very different world today. The Never Again Pledge is an example of software engineers getting in on this, right? So a bunch of data scientists got together when they were being asked to do some very unethical things with their data that were going to hurt immigrant populations. And they said, look, there is a long history of data being used to hurt vulnerable populations, and we don't want to be a part of it. So we will do things like destroy right, unethical data sets if we need to keep that from continuing. And we see this kind of collective action even at places like Google, where Project Maven was Battlefield AI. They were working on. And when the software engineers working on this realized what it was, they said, look, we didn't get into this business to make weapons. So if you make us keep working on this, we're going to walk. And Google backed down. They walked away from a $250 million military contract. And then they turned right around into Dragonfly, which is censored search in China. And this battle is still being fought. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society when machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Now, this is not some software guru giving a TED talk. This is Martin Luther King. Over 50 years ago, he saw this, and it's only more true today. So the question I will ask all of us is, how can we define our jobs in a way that allows us to be more human to each other? Thank you.
Wow, that was quite of a talk. I'm really thank you so much. That was I don't know, a lot of like in a lot of senses, to be honest. Thank you for bringing up this subject about all the things about all the things that's happening around the Black Lives Matter and so on, and everything is really, so it's like enough, right? So with these things about the why we so biased about it, so about it's life and period. So different culture, different language, whatever, yeah, but it's life. So, and also, yeah, I totally agree with the tech environment and so on, about women versus men and so on, which is incredible. I see it also. I mean, now that I'm living in Germany, I also see it. In Argentina, it was kind of be different where I'm from. It was changing. Here, actually, I don't know numbers and so, but as far as I see, I think it's, yeah, not so there yet, but I think it's working on it. But yeah, that was amazing. So I will now open to questions, like everything. So they're saying just in the chat, just to give you the same. It's a really amazing talk, and so thank you so much. So yeah, people. So anyone has, if you have any questions, very interesting topic, an important thing to think about. Thank you. So for all of you guys that are hearing, just get the book, because it will get better with the book. I will start right away after the talk, I think. To be honest, I will open the Kindle and I will eat it, in 2 hours. Yeah, really, because I realize a lot. When you are working as a designer, for sure, it's like, totally agree with this shareholders thing, user-centered design, or real user design. Not we need to sell this and then we'll see if it happens or if it works or so. I don't know if anyone has any questions. So what's what you can say? Can you tell us more about I don't know, a sample that you saw? I mean, an example in your work that you saw. Wow, there's a lot of biases, and you needed to work like towards like, and how you solve it, or how do you impact this, or in a people, or in a design per se, in an interface or something?
Sure. So the whole middle section of my book actually is about stakeholder biases and the people that you work with and kind of the biases they might have and sort of how to navigate that. And one of the things you find is that, people can be very, obstinate with ideas that they have about like how design should be or what decisions to make. And so there's a little bit of what I call stakeholder inception, where it's almost more important, rather than kind of sell your idea, it's almost more important, more impactful if someone thinks it was their idea. And so I'll give you an example. I was working with a client who had some pretty valuable content behind a paywall, and they were convinced that it needed to be there and that it was going to generate them all this money. And the research showed that it wasn't really generating any clicks for them. It wasn't really generating any, like, it wasn't achieving whatever their goal was, and that it wasn't the sort of thing that users wanted to go behind a paywall for. So what we did was, and we told them this, and it didn't go anywhere. So what we did was we said, okay, we're going to do a workshop, and y'all are going to list all the reasons that you're making this content, right? We'll put that up on a wall. And then we're going to, next to that, put a list of all the reasons your users are looking for that content, right? Because we did the research and we put those two. So you have this list of user goals and business goals right next to each other. We said, okay, let's do a brainstorming session where we try to figure out how might we make these two lists, how might we use content to make these two lists happy? And then we just let them go. And by the end of that exercise, they came to the conclusion that, oh, you know what we could do? We could take this content here from behind the paywall. And I was like, that's a great idea that you had. Good job.
Right.
Never would have thought of that on my own. Go. Yeah, do that. That's a great idea.
You
And,
just help them to think about
exactly.
it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And the value of an approach like that is it's more honest in a weird way, because it's not them taking that because they trust me. It's them taking that because that's a conclusion they got to themselves, right? Given the exact same data look at that we had, they did the math, right? And the other thing about it is, when it's your idea, you fight for it hard, right? If they like the idea that we sold them, if the going goes rough, they can say, well, that's their idea. We don't really, we can change course. If it's their idea, they'll fight for it hard. So yeah, but that's one of the sort of bias examples, like case studies we kind of talked about in the book.
Totally, super interesting, because I cannot think about my current work or previous work and so on, where you have this all the time, and not even talking about the classic problem with some startups and so on, that that's just like, let's time, let's just do it and see what happens. Is we need to put this into hands of the real users. Oh, no, just do it. It's like, it's struggling, right, with this all the time. It's hopefully it will change. I think it's everything versus time versus money, obviously, and business goals, and to get there. But when a lot of people realize that, obviously, that you can what can I achieve by doing these things before, it's like much more easier. So I'm trying to see if there's some questions. I want to know more if there's something he had identified in terms of design jobs. Wait, I have a question. Yeah. Abigail, a friend of mine from here, from Argentina, she says, I want to know more if there's something he had identified in terms of design jobs. Right. So I think she's saying regarding when the companies are looking for designers, right? In terms of woman versus man and so on, and or this super tech guy or non-tech guy. And so did you have any example of it besides the one that you show us? Or did you had any opportunity with this? Or was your experience actually maybe with you, maybe? Or in your career and so? Or
So do you mean in terms of like noticing bias in the hiring chains I've been in, or?
yeah, I think it's I think this is more in terms of she's a designer as well, so and she's asking maybe because of, I don't know, in design and design positioning. This is so design position versus also in between men and women, right? So head of design man, the head of a manager of a man, and so on. You know this.
Yeah, if you're asking if this is sort of unique to design, it's not. It's universal. Like just at least in American culture. I can't necessarily speak to most of the studies I looked at. I think were focused on American hiring culture, but pretty much regardless of the job type, this is a universal just gender problem in hiring, and it's gender and it's race based too. So one of the other studies, there is a phenomenon known as whitening your resume, where you basically eliminate any indication that you are Black or that you are Asian. And so there was an experiment that looked at Black people and Asian people who whitened their resumes versus those who didn't. And those who did whiten their resumes were, if they were Asian, they were twice as likely to get a callback. And if they were Black, 2.5 times as likely to get a callback. This included companies that touted their diversity. Yeah. So this is like not necessarily just a tech problem. This is just hiring in general is very biased against women and people of color.
Yeah, totally agree. And she was asking also about how designers bring these ethical questions to the job interview, which is not easy, right? So how? That's why it's because it's a bias. How you say something that, hey, you're biased. You had a bias, a huge bias.
Are you asking sort of like how to bring that up during the job interview?
Yeah, exactly. She's asking that.
I think that's a great idea. Honestly, if the company you're trying to get a job at doesn't bring it up, that's kind of a red flag right there.
Yeah, totally. Like stop, don't go in there.
It's like if this entire time we haven't talked about ethics once, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to work here. Because one of two things is happening. Either one, they assume, well, everybody's ethical, right? Why would we need to talk about that? Which is a mistake. Or they actually don't care, which is even worse.
yeah, that's true, totally. That's dangerous.
So I would bring it up. Like if they don't bring it up, I would bring it up and say like, hey, let me give you a scenario. You were asked to do a job in Saudi Arabia, and the client is going to pay you, biggest fee you've ever had. But the client specifies because of the rules in Saudi Arabia, nobody who is gay can work on the team. And if women come on site, they have to wear, protective clothing, like they had and they can't speak to men or something like that, right? Do you take the job, right? And then watch them squirm.
Yeah, true. It will hurt because you will see it in the face. Like probably they will not know what to answer. So
yeah.
It will be
and at the very least, yeah, and at the very least, you want to know, like, how do you, even if you can't give me an answer now, tell me how you would arrive at your decision. Like, do you have a process for making those kinds of decisions? Again, if they don't, I don't know, because the thing is, inevitably they're going to come up, like, that is going to happen. Some version of that is going to happen where they have to decide between money and ethics. It's inevitable.
Yes, totally agree. So yeah, Abigail is answering yes. That's my question. Okay, great. So I think there is no some other further questions so far. Would you like to add anything or any advice regarding? I don't know to ask where to start, because it's like, wow, it's already like I would maybe, and this is my bias. The first thing that came up to my mind and where to start is like making a list of the things that I know, that I think that I know, maybe, and then, like you said, scientifically or so, prove you're wrong, or prove like how many other partners are there, or and yeah, it's like a kind of user testing about your bias. I don't know, but do you recommend?
I think that's a great approach, right? Because I was actually writing to someone else about this. So I think that it's a very good idea to, audit yourself and sort of write down, here are 2 or 3 things that I am sure are true, right? And the more sure you are that they're true, the more you should test them, right? So let me pick this one thing. So I'll give you an example. I actually did this myself when I was doing the podcast. I was convinced that as a Black man, I am at the highest risk group for being shot by police, right, in America. And then I was reading about a bias called neglect of probability, where people sort of have outsized impressions of how much of a threat X, Y, or Z is. So I was like, okay, well, let me actually see what are the actual odds, in my lifetime, what are the actual odds I'm going to get shot by the cops as a Black man? So I dug in, right? And as I dug in, I started to discover, okay, I am definitely more likely to be shot by the cops than a white person. However, a Native American is way more, like ridiculously more likely to be shot by the cops, which I never knew. And I don't think a lot of people know. So I was like, okay, right? I learned something there, but I only learned it because I specifically wanted to challenge something I already believed, right? If I was just passively absorbing the news or passively absorbing Twitter, I'm never going to find that. So if you really do want to challenge yourself, you have to make an effort. The internet is not built to challenge you. The internet is built to comfort you. Yeah. So, or frighten you in familiar ways, right?
Yeah, but it's not more biased.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not designed to challenge you. I think because no one's figured out a business model for challenging people, but but that's not what it's designed to do. Yeah. So if you want to challenge yourself, you literally have to challenge yourself. Yeah. And similarly, like around patterns, like I know that I'm a big movie buff, and I know that for most of my life, the movies I've seen have been directed by white men. And so I had to consciously say, okay, I want to consciously break that pattern and seek out movies directed by women, directed by women of color, but directed by LGBTQ, written by women of color, like all of that. I literally have a list of all these different qualities where I'm like, I'm going to specifically seek that out. But again, if I just rely on Netflix or Hulu, the recommendation engine, just by, sheer scale, they're more likely to recommend a movie directed by a white man, because that's all I've ever watched. So again, it's about deliberately, with intent, going out and saying, I will challenge this thing that I know is my default.
Yeah. Well, the same Abigail, she's like really eager to know more, and she says like that's really crushing info that you just shared. Yeah, thank you so much. That's really helpful. Not just for, like I said before, it's for life. So it's just. Obviously, because then we are not job. Obviously, we are yeah. So we need to use this wisely. It's a dangerous tool, like you said in the talk. So even for evil or good. Totally agree. Thank you so much. Okay, I think it's we are approaching to the end. It's almost 8. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Really, it was amazing. This talk. So how do people find your podcast? So where you can find it? You can tell them now. So,
yeah. So the podcast is called the Cognitive Bias Podcast. So if you just Google that, it'll show up.
Easy peasy. Yeah.
My website is daviddylan-thomas.com. So if you ever need somebody to give a talk, or if you ever need somebody to do an inclusive design workshop, I'm your guy.
Awesome.
And you can contact me there.
Oh, totally. I think Abigail will contact you for sure, because she's like totally in this side. This is why she was asking a lot of questions about this. Yeah, another Argentinian is saying challenging your belief, a good life lesson. Yeah, totally. So David, it was an enormous pleasure. Thank you so much. I will eat the book. I hope the other people do it as well. I'm really eager to see what is in it besides the talk. Yeah, so this will be recorded. It will be in YouTube, so in a couple of hours, maybe tomorrow morning. So yeah, you will find it there if you want to share it to anyone. And so I will send you the link later. So
thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. It was really a pleasure. We can have like a 2-3 hours talk if you want, like live. So on. It will be amazing. So yeah, I'm probably sure that Abigail will ask me your contact and email. I will send her so you can talk to her. Maybe we can even, I don't know, create a online workshop eventually, like this that you were mentioning. Yeah, I will figure out something to do. All right, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone that is watching. It was a tremendous pleasure. So yeah, see ya. Have a nice day. Yeah, it's like a 2-3.
Yeah, my day, your night.
Yeah, exactly. I'm always I'm gonna to have a dinner now. Yeah.
Nice.
So really, thank you so much again. And see you. I hope to see you soon in another talk or
absolutely.
another thing that we can